Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Welcome, everybody, to today's Building My Legacy podcast. I have with me today Bew White III. He is chairman of the board of Gabriella White and its brand Summer Classics, Gabby and Wendy Jane. I am just delighted, actually, to have a conversation with Bew because there are so few people in our country today that understand fabrics and construction, producing products here in the States. So much of that got shipped overseas many years ago. And so to just have this wisdom and experience here and the lessons that he's learned is wonderful. It was named in 2013 as Entrepreneur of the Year by the Society of International Business Fellows. And in 2021, Bew received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Casual Furnishings Association. He's also the subject of a well-received biography, Summer Classic, The Bew White Story by Christopher Taunton. Now, you do come from a very unusual background. So few people have continued in the fabrication business, the construction of anything made with fabrics. And so to have that, your wisdom and experience is just wonderful. So tell us a little bit how you got started, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, I went to textile engineering school at Auburn, and with the idea that I would have a chance to work for my family's company. My great-grandfather started I'm a silver spooner, by the way. So my great-grandfather started a company back in the 1800s called Avondale Mills. It ended up being a Fortune 500 company. And so I was interested in working there, and I was the first person in the fourth generation to come in. So I was like, okay, wow. I figured I might be the only person in that generation to come in, but right after I joined, four of my cousins came in right behind me. So after I'm there a while, I said, I'm going to be really disappointed if I get to be 50 and I don't get to be president. And this is my one chance to be an entrepreneur. And I was I was in New York City. I got transferred. I went right to New York City out of college and started selling fabrics. My territory was Ohio, Michigan, Western Pennsylvania, and upstate New York. So I was on a plane going there most of the time, but I had a few accounts in New York City. And so from there, I started calling on some small entrepreneurs in these cities and also in New York City. And one day I asked one of my guys that I was calling on, how much you pay yourself. He had like 3 people in his office. He's a jobber, which I'm sure you know what that is. He'd buy and resell fabric for a profit. And he gave me his number, and he was making more than the CEO of Avondale Mills was. So I was like, wow, this seems a lot simpler, and maybe I could start this whole thing over again. Long term, I said, I wonder if I started something, if I could do what my great-grandfather did and create all this opportunity for my family. Because it was kind of waning out, and eventually Avondale Mills sold, and then it eventually went out of business as most of the textile businesses went overseas, and all the cut and sew went overseas as well. We were selling to cut and sew people. So I went off.
So just so the audience understands, cut and sew is the term that people in the industry talk about when you take fabric, you cut it according to a design or a pattern, and you sew it into whatever the product is that you're making, whether it's clothing or furniture or whatever, correct?
Right, that's correct. So they're buying, we buy 60-yard rolls now. We were making 500-yard rolls, and people had to be able to handle a 500-yard roll. So we had a 7,000-yard minimum per color per pattern.
That's a lot of product.
That was a lot. And I was we talked about this a little earlier. I called on Ralph Lauren when I first got up there because I was just fascinated with the products he was doing, his logo and the model, and how does this work? And he didn't really make anything. Mostly we called on cutters, people that cut and sewed, and like back then Levi Strauss and H.G. Lee and Wrangler and all the fashion people were cutting sewing their own product. Even Liz Claiborne was doing that. In fact, I called on Liz Claiborne. So that's when she first got started. So it's a totally different industry back then, and it was a big industry. Well, Avondale at that time had over 5,000 employees in it, and ended up having something close to 7,000 at one point. So it's really changed since then. And then so I decided I would strike out on my own, and so I've made the first mistake in my MBA in mistakes. And I had to pivot pretty dramatically and pretty quick. I bought part of a small company that actually was in the furniture business, and that's how I got in the furniture business. I bought a small portion of a small company, but right after I got in there, I realized, oh my gosh, this is a disaster. I don't have enough money to save this. I'm not going to put any more money in. The owner's not going to put any more money in. I'm going to have to leave. I'm going to have to start my own company. So I left and I started a sales rep company. And that worked really well, except that I was gone all the time. So I went from making $60,000 when I was 28 years old. This was back in the 70s, so that was a great salary back then. To making $25,000, which I couldn't live on. I wasn't very good at budgeting, so I kind of killed myself. And that was another reason I had to leave. I said, I can't even make it on what I'm making. I don't see any chance of making more. So after 9 months, I left and I started something called Vista Corporation. And that was the beginning of becoming a sales rep. And it's pretty quick after that, I started making $200,000 a year. And that turned out really well, but I was never at home. So I said, I got to get something that's not so dependent on me, on what I do every day. And if I don't sell anything, I don't make anything. And if I'm not on the road, I can't sell anything because, we didn't have internet. We didn't even have fax machines. It was just a lot different environment than it is now. We had markets, but not like the markets today. Markets are more where you sell a lot at market than they were back then. So you really had to go take your show on the road to sell. So I said, okay, I've got to start something. And I started like 7 or 8 different companies under the Vista label. I started a mirror company, Vista Mirror, Vista Lighting, Vista Wicker. I got it in all kinds of businesses to try to see if I could build it up to make enough to cover my income. I'm in Spartanburg, South Carolina, in one of my dealers, and I go on to this is. Have you ever heard the story about Steve Jobs stealing the mouse from Xerox?
No, but I'm curious now.
Steve Jobs was in the Xerox lab in LA, or maybe in San Francisco area, Palo Alto. And he's in there, he sees all this cool stuff they're working on. He sees the mouse, and he goes, like, that's a great idea. And he goes back, finds out it's not patented, puts it in his line and sells thousands of mouses, the mouse that operates your computer, or that used to. Well, a lot of people still have them. But so this is kind of that same story about how I got started. So I'm in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and I go down to this guy's patio department, and he's got these cool white Adirondack chairs. Well, nobody back then had Adirondack chairs. And they have the name Summer Classics and a scripty logo. And I go, like, he comes down. I kind of go look at their department to see what I could sell them. What are the open slots is what we used to call it. And he comes down. I was like, who is this? Who's the Summer Classics thing? And he says, well, that's me. I was like, what are you doing? Retailers don't start their own brand. He's like, well, I got this guy down the street making these Adirondack chairs and painting them, and I'm selling them, and I came up with that name. I'm like, wow, that's a great name. I love that name. And then and after I left, I was like, I can't quit thinking about this. So I go back to Birmingham, and I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. And I called my father as a lawyer. I said, how do you get a trademark? And he says, well, I don't do that, but call so-and-so. So I call this guy. I was like, how do I get a trademark? I want to trademark something. Okay, well, what is it? So I tell him, it's Summer Classics. I want to do the Summer Classics for outdoor furniture. He's like, well, how'd you get that idea? And then I tell him the story about being in South Carolina and seeing it. He says, well, you can't have it. I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, there's something called first use. If somebody has used it before, you can't have it. I said, well, is there some way I can get it? He said, yeah, that guy can agree to give it to you. I said, okay. Well, how long does it take to get a trademark? Well, it takes 6 to 9 months. Because back then you had to do everything by mail.
Right.
You had to mail it into the U.S. government patent office and say, can I get a trademark on this? So I said, I tell you what, go ahead and start the process. And then if I can get it, I'll call him. But there's no sense if somebody else already has it. There's no sense in me calling him and finding out. So about 9 months later, he called me and says, okay, you can get it. So I called this guy, Curtis Hart, with Stuckey Brothers in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and said, hey, Curtis, you know that Summer Classics thing? What are you doing with that? And he was like, oh, nothing. The guy went out of business. I'm not doing anything. I said, well, can I have it? He said, yeah, you can have it. I said, well, will you sign something? Yeah, I'll sign something. So I send him this paperwork to sign, and that's how I really got the name. I wish I'd thought of it myself, but I've had it for since 1987, so it's been a while.
Patience sometimes pays off, doesn't it?
Yeah. Learned a lot during that process, too, of what it takes to get a trademark. And we have lots of trademarks now, so it's made a big difference.
So, Bew, you talk about the 6 critical traits of an entrepreneur. What are they? What have you learned are the 6 essential traits?
Well, I really got this from a book that Gino Whitman, the guy that came up with EOS, I don't know if you've ever read EOS. He came up with this, and I read it, and I went, well, thank God I have those. But it's like somebody needs to know if they're thinking about going to start their own business and be an entrepreneur, they need to know that. And in his words, you got to have all 6 of these. And if you don't have all 6, don't even go there. Don't try. And the one that really stops most people is risk taker. Because a lot of people are just risk adverse, and you got to be like, I have an MBA in failure. You know, I've failed so many times. I'm working on my PhD now for failing and it's a great teacher, but you got to recover from that and grit through it. You know, so that's risk taker is not the biggest one, but it's one that kind of stops most people. Passionate is one. Visionary. Being able to see the future before it happens. So my idea was to create an outdoor furniture line that would last for 20 years or longer, and it would be classic designs. It could be modern classic. It doesn't have to be traditional classic. And lots of our products are modern, but contemporary, no. We don't do contemporary, but we have a lot of modern in the line. And so what you wanted to do is not just last 20 years, but they still like it. It's still like, you know, I still like it. I've had this 15, 20 years. I still like the way it looks. So that was a critical part. And nobody had ever done this before, but and I wanted to use the Ralph Lauren business model that I learned from calling on him of how he could switch from product to product without having to build a new factory to make it, you know. And so I used that model that I'd learned from back in the 70s, and then was able to change from the thing. So I've named 3: risk taker, visionary, being responsible, which I referred to you as being very responsible, driven, and driven. You'll know if you're driven because you can't sleep at night. You're trying to get something done and you're trying to push through, and you're saying, "I like whoever gave me this driven gene. I'm kind of mad at them because it doesn't help my sleep pattern."
You know, that's interesting because we also talk about sleep as being essential for health, right? So driven and sleep are antagonistic to some extent. So how have you weathered that one?
I'm able to sleep,
Okay.
but I do have situations that I'm in that I have to push through, particularly if I like back in the Great Recession. I was banking with Royal Bank of Scotland, and I had a $20 million loan with them, and they lost $60 billion in the fourth quarter, the largest loss in corporate history in the fourth quarter of 2008. And so they had nowhere to get money. They were literally running out of money. Bank of England ended up taking them over eventually, but during this process, they were trying to go to their customers and say, move your loan. we need your money back that we've lent you.
All right. And that's a lot of money to move.
Yes. And during that period, you couldn't move your loan. I eventually moved my loan, but during the period, I was like, I can't sleep. I was like, this is, like, I don't need amphetamine to stay awake. I'm like, I don't know what to do. For me, it was prayer. I just pray. I said, I can't get through this myself. I'm just going to ask for wisdom. I got to have something I don't have. And you're going to have to give it to me because I don't know what to do. I haven't been in a situation like this. Walk me through this. And, I got through it. And literally, I closed a loan with Wells Fargo the day before my loan with the Royal Bank of Scotland was due. So it was like miraculous, but it was scary. I mean, it was right down to the wire. And after that, I slept a lot better.
Wow.
No, I usually hit the pillow and I'm asleep. So drive does change that because you'll wake up and you're like, I got to do this. And you're just so driven to get things done. But you need that gene to be able to be an entrepreneur.
Okay. So we've got vision, passion, responsibility, driven, risk-taking. What have I missed?
Responsible. Did you say that one?
Yeah.
Problem solver, maybe.
Problem solving. That one's okay. Talk a little bit about that one.
So you're in a meeting, right? And things, basically, we run our business on a program called EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, and we're talking about issues, and we bring up issues during the meeting that come up, and there's weekly issues that can be solved within a week, but there's also things that take a quarter to solve. And you're basically, and the best way to look at this is don't get in the minutia. You can solve those. You should be able to solve that on your own. But the quarterlies and the yearly, what they call rocks, need to go on a board, and somebody's got to be responsible for solving that issue over the period of a quarter, or it could be a period of a year. I mean, it could be as simple as we've got to sell $20 million this quarter, something like that. It could be that. And then you back into how are you going to sell 20 million, and then who's responsible, and back it into the sales force, and then see what their numbers are. You may come up with we're not going to hit that number. What are you going to hit? And then back into that number, or maybe more.
Got it. So what made you choose the EOS system? I mean, it's a remarkable system. What?
It is a remarkable system, but I was running the company, and my son came in and said, I was trying to convince him that he needed to take over. And I'm like, I can't keep doing this. You've got to take over. He said, well, if you'll let us do EOS, I'll do it. And I was like, well, okay, what's EOS? And he told me, I said, okay, let's do that. I'm fine with that. And so he did it. And I was like, this is awesome. So a lot of the employees don't like it because it's really structured. And some people like a very loose environment, which was more like what I was doing. I had a lot of reports, and under EOS, you can only have a maximum of 7 reports. I think I had 10. And I was very, it was real top down. And this is more passing on responsibility to the staff.
Got it. So more involvement. And so tell me, for you, your biggest challenge that you dealt with, I hear one of your biggest ones was the bank and dealing with the financing. But besides that, what has been one of your biggest challenges?
Well, right now it's the freight from overseas. Yeah, I mean, I'm getting clobbered on. My freight from Indonesia has gone from $6,000 a container to $26,000 a container. But
wow.
I'd say challenges is growth. Some people look at growth as being a great thing, and there is finance either going public or private equity or financing negative growth. In other words, negative, you're not making money, you're losing money, and you're losing until you hit your break even way in the future. And then you start making money. Amazon's a perfect example of that. So is Tesla, of where you're losing money, losing tons of money, and you're supported by stockholders and bond, private debt, stuff like that. Well, mine was financed by internally. You had to finance it internally. So you always had an open door policy on banks. That was a critical part of our success. Is if a bank wanted to meet with me, I would meet with them for lunch, breakfast, anytime, any bank, anywhere, because I wanted them to understand the business. And usually they would go like, okay, thanks, bye. Because they didn't, they were like, I can't do that kind of deal.
Right. Well, but that is the difference between a privately held company versus a publicly traded company. Yes. Is you're more beholden to banks.
And you originally was signing personal guarantees for everything. I mean, at one point I had a negative net worth of, and I was thinking I was going to be a millionaire by the time I was 40, and at 30 something, I'm negative 260,000. I'm like going, I am toast. I'll never get there. I got there. I actually got to $1 million by the time I was 40, but it was paper. And I was like, well, that's not the right goal. I don't know why I'm so focused on money. I need to be, I need to be focused on building a culture and how to build something that's sustainable, not just money. You know what I'm saying? So that really changed my perspective. And it was a restart for me, but that's a long time ago. So that's, what was that, 1990.
So, Bew, you also talk a little bit about legacy and relationships. Speak a little bit about that, if you would, please.
Well, the most important relationship in my life is my wife. I mean, she's so during this process of starting summer classes and getting off the road from making $250,000 to where I finally started making a decent amount of money, I was paying myself $41,000 a year. And at the 11th year, I went, honey, I've been paying myself $41,000 a year for 11 years. This is crazy. Actually, I'll get a job. And she would say, no, I believe in you. You can do this. Keep going.
Oh, interesting.
Go, you believe in me when I don't believe in myself. And so I just went, okay, all right. I picked myself up and go back out there and get after it. And eventually it worked. She was right. I mean, I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm just too early. It's like waiting on God as opposed to your own patience.
So tell me, keeping a relationship under that stress takes some unusual either characteristics, skills, something on your part. What do you think it was?
I think it's the other person in that particular case. In the case of my wife, she's just incredible. She's an incredible Christian. I want to be like her. She would say she wants to be like me. So that kind of works in reverse. I was like, nah, you don't want to be like me. But I think it, and one of the things we had talked about this a little bit is relationships. To me, relationships in the business with your suppliers, with your employees, with your clients is what you build your business on. I had a client call me from Orange County, California today and said, I read your book, incredible. It's so cool that I know a lot of the people in it, but I think anybody would enjoy the story. And I said, well, you're a woman. My best friends are saying it's got too much mush in it. I was like, okay, well, let your wife read it. She'll love it. But they said, I love the business story, but the mush is a little much. I was like, okay, well, fine. So I think relationships are a critical part. And I think, if you had any young viewers or listeners, my advice to them, which is what really helped me, was I started working when I was 13 years old. And I worked all during college, every day during college, the weekends during college, except for football games. But we were closed on football games because nobody would come to the store. And so, I think working through college, to me, made me understand the importance of how a business works as opposed to book knowledge. So the things I was learning, like how fabric is made, was important. But after you make the fabric, you have to sell it, deliver it, collect the money, and start over again, and design it. Like we talked about before, designing fabric was really critical. Something I really wanted to get into really was designing apparel as much as anything, but ended up designing furniture, which is even a little more complicated. And originally I was designing it on the back of an envelope and then getting samples made. And back then I would make the sample over and over and over until I got it right. And I'd literally have to spend a week at the plant to make one chair. And eventually I hired designers and they could draw it to scale. And when they draw it to scale, the factory could make it exactly. And I went through I had stopped all this trial and error of making it over and over again to get it right. So it made a big difference.
There's a stage, isn't there, in that entrepreneurial journey? You do it yourself at first. And then as you pull some resources together, you're capable of reaching out beyond. What have we left out, Bew, that you would like our audience to know? Our time is almost up. This has been wonderful time.
I know that I was talking to somebody the other day. I was saying, at one point I was cleaning the bathrooms and I kept going like, am I going to be cleaning the bathrooms the rest of my life? So, that's something you have to think about is, are you willing to do just about anything to push through difficult situations when you don't have the money to make payroll? And there are a lot of situations in the book that describe actually God-given things that happened that got me where I made payroll one week. Like, wow, I had 10 truckloads returned from Williams-Sonoma that I had actually recalled because I had a problem with the paint. I had to say, hey, I know you're selling the heck out of stuff, but I need you to send it all back to me because it might peel, it might not. And then I was like, what do I do with this stuff? And then I had a sale at the factory and it was like incredible. I mean, we could only open on the weekend and we sold 50-something thousand that in 2 days, really a day and a half. I was like, okay, wow, payroll. And now I can get the money out of all this product. And so it's what got us into retail, our own stores. I was like, wow, people really love this stuff. They want to buy it. I sold more in a weekend and a day and a half than I have sold in Birmingham in my career. So maybe retail's the way to go. Big lesson for me.
Well, it helps to have another outlet, doesn't it? It's that back end when you are in the manufacturing business or production business.
And so you find out what the consumer likes. As opposed to what your dealer wants to buy.
Yeah. So the book that you mentioned is Summer Classics, correct?
It's a summer classic.
A summer classic. Bew White story. So for those of you who are interested in getting a copy of that, it's on Amazon, is it not?
It's on Amazon, and there's an Audible version that's read by my roommate in college who was an actor, producer, director, and won a couple of Emmys. It's kind of an interesting story. He's reading it. I listened to him, and I called him. I said, Michael, you were crying while you were reading that. Were you acting or was that real? And he says, well, where was it? And I was like, okay, you were acting. It's like, you don't know where you were crying. So anyway, he's pretty good.
Wonderful. So those of you who are interested in reading it, please pick up a copy at Amazon, a summer classic. And we will have information about Bew White in our show notes. So if you would like to get in contact with him, will be able to do so. Bew, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Lois. Appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
And for those of you who are listening to Building My Legacy podcast today, thank you very much. And remember to visit our website at www.buildtomorrow2.com. Thanks much.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.